Stephanie Thompson, if you didn't catch on to that already. I work for a company called Pointwise. I work in the web development IT department. The company that I actually work for, we create software that enables engineers to make meshes and things like that for computational fluid dynamics. Basically, they're a bunch of rocket scientists. That's kind of what they do, very academic, based here in Fort Worth. Most of them came from General Dynamics and Lockheed. Am I skipping ahead? That's fine. Should we go back? So when we get done today, if you want to take down my email address or my LinkedIn, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. If you get stuck, something doesn't seem to be working right, I can see if I can help you troubleshoot it. So if you look on the actual Meetup event page, I posted a link a little bit ago that will take you to some example files that we'll be using to kind of create our web form that we're going to use, and then we'll just code along the PHP part. So go ahead and get that set up if you want to while we're talking. I'm just going to kind of cover some of the basic information of how this whole process works, because once you understand that, it's a little bit easier to take this and do it in any other language. So we've got our little layout here, how the actual email process works, some differences in some of the technology, why we're even learning PHP at this point, a nice little joke people like to play on each other about PHP, and then we'll kind of get into the actual code part. So I stole this nice little infographic off the internet, so that way we have a good visual of how the process works. So we all, most of us, we get in our email, we send it, it's gone, it gets there, we don't think about it. But it actually has to go through some steps before it gets there. And that's kind of where this comes in, is we're in the middle of that, we're making this happen. So we've got yourself, and it has to hit an SMTP server. This is what actually sends it, packages it up and encrypts it and sends it. That's part of PHP, is you have to have a server to run any PHP code. It cannot be run in your browser, it can't be run locally, you have to be running it on a server. So just keep that in mind anytime you're actually trying to work on it. Replit thing I posted earlier is a great place to kind of work through some of those things without having to actually install any of that on your own computer or have access to another machine. So once your SMTP server has your email, it has to figure out where you're sending it. So the @ part of your email, so what we're using tonight is going to be Gmail. At Gmail, your DNS server goes and looks. It says, hey, this is the IP address for this. Send it here, and then from there it picks who it needs to go to, and you end up with it in your inbox. And I put the terrible nerd joke down here about there's no place like home. There's a little bit of an IT lesson in here too, I guess. Okay, so some other terms we're going to come across anytime you're working on this are going to be IMAP and POP3. Now, the big difference here is that with IMAP, you're able to, from your server, send your email anywhere you want to go and it stays there. So I can look at it on my computer, I can look at it on my phone, it doesn't get deleted as soon as I put it into my actual inbox. Now, a lot of this is usually used in big organizations where they have an actual mail server and, lots of stuff coming in and out, lots of employees. Then you've got your POP3, which is, it's on your server, but the second you download it, it's not on your server anymore. It's gone. So don't lose it. Most people don't choose this option if they're giving it at any point in time, because it is very easy to just delete stuff and it's gone. And you don't really realize it's what's happening. So nice little pictures here to try to help you remember. IMAP is several devices, POP3 has only got the one. Okay, so what we're going to be doing tonight, we'll be taking some inputs from this, basically a demo form that I wrote. If you haven't gotten to the code part yet, this is it here, and we can go back over that some more and some of the things that are happening there. I did some basic styling on it and put a confirmation page that we'll be sending people to once they actually submit it. And there's also, for anyone, how familiar with HTML are we? Is there anyone that's completely brand new to HTML? Okay, good. So we've got this little piece here that we'll talk about later. It says spam catch. And I've given it the class of hidden, which is meaning we don't want our customers to see this. We don't want people that are actually using this form to see this, but it's there to catch bots. And we'll go kind of over what it's actually doing when we get to the script part. Okay. So there are a lot of people with a lot of strong feelings about PHP. Some people don't care, some people hate it, think it needs to die, they don't understand why it hasn't died yet. But it has been in use for so long and so widely that most of the legacy stuff you're going to come across is going to have used this in some way. It's very likely that if you work at an older place that's been around for a while, you'll come across some PHP, and it's beneficial to you to at least be able to read it and kind of understand what's going on with it. Because as of last year, still nearly 80% of known backends are still using PHP for something. Okay, and then this is something people like to pull on people that they think aren't real developers. I've had someone actually ask me this before in a very joking way, like they were going to get me. So does anybody actually know what the first P in PHP stands for? No one? All right. You leave with nothing else from this class. At least you'll know this. It stands for PHP. It was originally derived from personal homepage tools, but the actual acronym stands for PHP Hypertext Preprocessor. So the important part, yes, the first P in PHP stands for PHP. All right. So just a little bit more background. The latest release is going to be in PHP 7. If you can all avoid it, upgrade, whatever you do, get out of PHP 5. There are a lot of security issues there. There's a lot of syntax changes between the two also, so there might be a little bit of a learning curve, making sure you've got everything up to date with that. You can't just upgrade. So, upgrade your server, make sure all of your code matches to the new stuff. They've already end-of-lifed it as of last year, so expect that to really need to go away. And from what I read, there's still a ton of people using PHP 5. I know we have to use it at my company because we have a third-party application we use for something, and when I asked them if I could upgrade our server to PHP 7, they basically told me, we don't know. It's still in 5, we don't know, we have no idea if this will be okay. So that's a nice little hurdle to go over with some people, but hopefully enough people will be out of 5 soon. The script that we're doing tonight is procedural. So you can program in PHP in an object-oriented manner, but you can also do it in a procedural manner. And a lot of people have feelings on where the line is between those two also. The definition I'm going with is we're not writing any objects, we're not writing methods. These aren't big functions that we're writing. We have one simple function and some basic processes that are happening. It is very procedural. Get the stuff, send the stuff. I came across a small hurdle when using REPL. Since you cannot manipulate the server that is a part of that program, you can't install any extra packages. The package I normally use is the SendMail package, which works with a pre-built function in PHP. So since I couldn't do that, we're going to use something called PHPMailer. It's included in the file set in that link that I gave you, so you can pull those files and copy them out of there. Basically what that does is it creates an SMTP server for you, because at this point they don't have that option. And you kind of build that into your code. It creates the server, it runs it out of that code, and then you're still able to process your email. So if you're ever in a situation with something like this where you cannot get access to your server for some reason, which hopefully that will never be a problem, you'll at least have someone that can get to it and make changes. This is a good choice to use to kind of get through that. And then REPL is what we're using as the development environment. And I was going to put the source files up, and then I realized I couldn't. So if anybody wants those individually later on, I can send you a zip file. Just feel free to email me, and I'll send you what we got. Okay, so the mail function. This is what we're using to send the mail. This is a built-in PHP function, and for the most part, literally all you're doing is passing some variables into it. You don't have to do anything special for that. It's already there. It knows what to do as long as you've got PHP installed. Another little graphic I stole off the internet here has some definitions of what variables we're looking at. Now, if you see, the from isn't passed up here. That's because it already knows. It's just built in. You don't have to tell it to who you're sending it from. It's kind of, you tell it in one place, you don't have to pass it into your mail function. So you'll set who you're sending from, you'll set who it's going to, the subject and the message, and then headers are kind of an extra setting. So you can set what type of email you're sending. You can set the priority level on it, things like that you might need to adjust for certain instances. Like where I'm at, we've got a priority level of highest set on some of our emails, so that way they don't get overlooked, because that happens sometimes. And I can provide the slides too, so we can get to these links later if they want to kind of look through some of this other documentation. Okay, so a little bit more about PHPMailer. It's a full-featured email creation transfer class. So like I was saying earlier, it creates the server for you. You don't have to have any other packages. It does it in your code. And it's very robust. It provides a lot of the things a typical email server will already have on it that normally you wouldn't be able to get to. So it's pretty useful. They claim to have all this protection against header injection attacks too. I haven't really looked into it that hard. So if you want to, when we leave here, kind of look at it some more. They've got a massive documentation set up for it. Lots of different examples of how you can use it, different email clients you can use it with. Tonight we'll be using Gmail, so let's start coding. If you want to go into REPL and go ahead and start your PHP file, the first thing you need to know is all PHP code has to be in these tags. Otherwise it doesn't know. And you basically, you're less than, question mark PHP, question mark, greater than, less than, I don't know which way those go. Either way, has to be in there. So I've kind of done screenshots on this, on piece by piece of what we're doing. You have any questions yet? Yeah.
I'm sorry, where were the files that you were saying?
Okay, REPL on it. You can create your own and kind of copy and paste the files. I tried to download them earlier, it wouldn't let me. But we might be able to kind of work with that blank space, but this is kind of why I wanted to provide them separately also, so that way you have a copy that you can upload.
But aren't we supposed to put that question mark with?
So what we're doing here is the index page that you see, they would not let me create just an HTML file. So we're calling it index.php. It works the same. Since it's only HTML code that's in there, it runs just fine. It's kind of part of PHP is that you can embed it anywhere in HTML file and it'll kind of run the same. There's a little bit of leeway there as far as how that functions. You'll also see in there is the PHPMailer set of files. Those are the source files you'll need to actually create the PHP or the SMTP server. Really not going to touch those. They're just resources that we need to make this function correctly. Now, let's see, I've got a confirmation page also. That's where we're sending people when we're done. The CSS files, you don't really have to look at them. It's just doing the basic styling that you're seeing on it. Now, the one we want to work on is the one that says submit.php. That one is completely blank. So this is where we're going to start putting in our code. This particular part is setting up the PHPMailer. We have to tell it that we want to use this service. This is where it's located at as far as where it's in relation to our files. Tell it that we need a new one and that it's SMTP. And like I said, they've got a ton of documentation. There's several different ways of doing this. This is just the most direct one for this particular application.
So are you saying that when you put this use, the 3 lines uses,
Yes.
what is
So
that again?
basically everything that's in here, there's a file in that page that says submit.php. That's where we're going to want to put all of this.
Okay.
Because our HTML form is called this particular file whenever we have people hit that submit button. And now comments also, in PHP, that's what these are. They're very similar to JavaScript. Your double slashes for single line, your slash star slash for multi-line. As far as variables and everything like that goes, it's pretty case sensitive. It also,
For like uppercase, lowercase,
yes, you also cannot use dashes in your variables. It's just not accepted in PHP, so everything has to be with an underscore. Using to kind of create our SMTP connection and our little server here. So in order to do that, we have to tell the script that we need those resources. That's where we're telling it to use the PHPMailer. And the ones we're using for this are PHPMailer, SMTP, and exceptions, just in case something doesn't work right or goes wrong. We've got that extra bit of error catching right there. So this is the location that the files are stored in reference to where your actual files are in this particular setup. And we're telling it to require these things just kind of like you would in JavaScript. Now this part right here starts PHPMailer. And I passed true to it because we do want to enable the exceptions. It's always good to kind of have some extra feedback in case something is wrong. So we put that in there. And then to specify the type, because there's a couple of other options that you can use for your mail server that they've got. I chose SMTP. They've got a couple of others that aren't as popular. So we have to tell it that we are using the SMTP. That's what this part here does. Is there any questions so far? Okay. So we're going to add to this. Once you get to the is SMTP, we'll put in our variables. Now these variables are going to set what we are taking from the form. The form is doing a post action. So when we take it in, we're going to assign it a new name that has the underscore, because everything I did on the HTML file has a dash. We're doing some filtering in this process also, because I cannot stress this enough. You've got to sanitize everything that comes in. Anything people are opening up to send you things through, they will try to attack you. Bots, hackers, doesn't matter, they will try to attack you. So this filter underscore var is using the filter sanitize string function. So this will keep any characters, any code from being injected into your form and coming in and being able to disrupt your systems. This is extremely important. In my opinion, always do it on the front end, do it on the back end, do it everywhere you can, because even if they aren't just going to your page, they can still find and run this script without having to even touch an HTML page. They find it, they can keep running it, they can keep putting stuff in there, and they will, which is part of that extra field that I put in earlier. We'll talk about that in a minute. So we're going to set our first name, we're going to set a last name variable, the email address, and the comments. And the filter for the email address, they have a specific one through PHP that will verify that this is a valid email address. So that's kind of why that's there. Now that extra field that's in your form, that's what this last bit is for. So what a lot of bots will do is they will hit your script, and whenever they do it, they will basically place whatever text in every input field that they see. So a real person won't see that input field when they go to your page, but a bot will, and they will fill it with something. We name it email because that's why I use email address on my form instead of email, because those bots are looking for the term email. And whenever they find it, they're going to put something in there. And basically what this does is if there's something in that field that nobody should be able to see, it kills it. It won't send the mail at all. So you won't end up with a bunch of spam. It's kind of an extra step that you can throw in there that will stop them from being able to hit it. I say this from experience. There was one day I come in and there's 1,700 random emails. And they were just, somebody just kept hitting it and kept loading it full of junk. All in the inbox, and everybody, oh my God, there's so many emails. So now that's there. So if this invisible field that nobody should be able to see has something in it, this form dies off, goes away. Just make sure you're putting this section after your declaration about the is SMTP, so this is all in one script. Yes?
Actually, I have a question.
Okay.
Probably a dumb question, but so what's the difference in PHP? Like, what's the little arrow for technically? When you have $sign mail, I'm gonna call it an arrow, unless I'm just going blind and it's not an arrow.
It's not an arrow. I was like, what arrow? Oh, up here, this one.
Yeah.
So it's kind of their way of also, so this mail thing is kind of a variable itself.
Okay.
So whenever we go to send it, it will capture everything that has that mail variable, and it's just saying, just basically it equals that. It's just kind of another way of doing it. And so there's going to be some more fields that have that message is this. All of that gets captured all together into one variable and sent at the same time. And it auto-detects a lot of stuff. It knows what things are because we'll call part of it message, or I think body, I think is what we use. I'll have to look again. Like I said, I had to change a lot of things at the last minute, so yeah, that's kind of, it's newer to me too because it's been a while since I've really coded in PHP a lot. Mostly what I use it for now is form submissions. So that was actually a little new to me too. I was like, oh hey, that's different. So it seems to be just an assignment variable type thing.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so is it like, does the equals operator have a difference between using that and the equals operator?
That I don't know for sure. I didn't look that far into it.
I'm just curious.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, something to look for,
Yeah.
see. But yeah, it's got a lot of the same syntax that you do in other languages, like the bang here before empty means not empty, if that is something you haven't seen before.
Bang, or okay, keep going.
Yeah, and these, one more note about the variables themselves. Like I said, they're coming through a post request, so that's why we're using post here. But the thing it's looking for is the name assignment on your input fields, not the ID. I put both of them on there just for the sake of doing it, but so if you actually go look at the code for the form, you'll see that. But as far as what this is taking, it's looking for the name.
Do you mind going over what you just said about
Sure can.
the variables? I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's hard to kind of take both in and actually type it. And I try to make sure you use a lot of comments too, so that way when you're going back over this later, you get some sort of instructions or reference to what's happening. So this set of variables up here is what we're taking in from our form. The form is doing a post request, so that's this part here. We're filtering out any code injection attacks and things like that. So we have to declare that we want to use this, and we're using the filter sanitize string or the filter sanitize email. It's built into PHP, it knows what these are. So as long as you declare it this way, it knows what to do whenever it creates this new variable. So your variables over here that are coming from your form are based on the name option on your input field. I put the IDs in there as well, but it's looking for the name. So post the name, and it'll assign it to the new variables, which in this case, I put the underscore in because it does not accept the dash in PHP. And make it simple, I gave them all the same names. You can call them whatever you want to, it really doesn't matter. And in this last field is looking for that input field that we have hidden. It's been hidden by CSS because real people aren't going to know it's there, it doesn't matter, but bots will hit it, they'll put stuff in there, and I said before, we've gotten hit thousands of email overnight because I didn't have this protection in place before, and if that field is filled out, this part will kill it. If there's something in there, it's told to just kill the form off, don't send it. So we don't want to get all those junk emails. So we've got to do a little bit more of the PHPMailer setup. After we declare that set of variables, they've got their own set over here that we've got to work on some more. And now this stuff is pretty important. So since we're using Gmail, we've got to set where their host address is. If you're using your own server, this would be different, but this is straight from the documentation of how they want you to do this with Gmail. So this is what we're doing. The port 587, that is pretty default on almost any mail exchange type situation we'll get to. I think if it's 465, there's something not quite right, but 587 should be correct in just about any instance. We've got some other stuff for their encryption stuff. Like I said, this is straight from the documentation. I didn't write any of this. This is just to get it to function. The authentication part. This will come up. I created a separate Gmail account for this process. Now, whenever it goes through the authentication, you have to have an account that has a name, a password, and a box. Otherwise, this will not work. It has to have all of those things to actually authenticate to and send your email. Now, the username. This is the Gmail account that I made, scriptingclass4@gmail.com. This box right here, if you want to use it, you can use your own later on if you want to, but this has the security settings adjusted on it so it will actually work. If you try to use your own, it will tell you, hey, somebody's trying to authenticate through your account, there's a security problem. You actually have to go in and tell it to allow this to happen. It'll walk you through that process, but if you, like I said, if you want to use this one for testing purposes and learning, I'm going to keep it open. You can use it if you want to. It's already set and it should send your mail. Here's the password for it. Let's learn. 1, 2, 3, 4. The front part will be from that, or you can change it. You can actually use a different email address if you want to. And the name, right here in this little tick marks here, you can change the name to. And it'll say that whenever someone receives this, it's from scripting class. That's the name I picked for it. Now, this. Right now I've got it going back to that box on my own personal thing. You can put your own email address in there, you can put anyone you want to see it come to, you can change this on your own. And it'll get there. Now you'll see some stuff about TLS, just to kind of clarify what that is. It's basically what happens whenever your message gets encrypted. This is to keep people from spying on you, to breaking in and reading your emails and things like that. That part, that security layer, takes your messages, encrypts it, keeps other people out of it. So, yes.
Might be a silly question. When would I need to, why would I use PHP? Like,
So there's the reason for this is that I don't have a box sitting with me that has a mail server on it. That mail server is kind of what you have to send these from. Something has to be there to process what's going on. And even with this REPL development environment, since I can't change the settings on their server, they give you a something PHP installed on it. You cannot install anything else. Typically, I would install a different package. I usually use one called SendMail. Install a package, boom, you're done. They don't have that option. So in order to get this to actually make its own little server, little built-in email server, that's the point of the PHP mailer.
okay.
So
So then, I guess when would I use this, like, if I have a site, would I use like MailChimp or something like that? Like, you don't have to do that?
most
It's more
likely,
like to
I mean,
personalize it for
it's
you.
going to be based on your environment. Like, you might come up against that. I've used several hosting companies for other things before, and most of the time they've got the ability to go in there and change the settings on your server. Like, I need PHP, I need whatever else installed, and part of it in the mail settings in there is you can set, your own accounts and stuff, and part of that is also, depending on the service, installing extra packages like that. Now, if you don't have that option, here you go.
Okay.
Otherwise, you can use a different package and not have to go through coding all of this out in there. It will just know, hey, use this mail server. You tell it use this mail server, and it knows what to do. So that's the whole point of all this extra code. I wasn't planning, I thought, I don't know why, I thought I'd be able to do this in there, but as soon as I got in there, I was like, oh, okay, I can't touch this server. There's nothing else I can add to this. We had to figure out something else to do to actually make it function. And that's part of the tricky part with PHP, like I said earlier. You have to have a server to have PHP run. It has to have PHP installed on it. And in anything to do with mail, you have to have a mail server to actually process that stuff.
If you don't have PHP installed on the server, then
It just won't work. It'll tell you, it'll give you errors. And it's, usually pretty easy to install. Like I said, whenever you buy a hosting service, if you don't want to like build your own server and do all that stuff, they have options where you can go in there and pick, yes, I want PHP. Turn that on.
okay.
So it should be somewhat easy once you get into the dashboard for that. A lot of them have come a long way. They have a nice GUI when you go in there, have all your options laid out for you, and it's gotten a lot simpler than it used to be. So you'll see a lot of that stuff if you ever get to the point where you're doing that. Or if you want to build your own server, Linux is pretty easy. Just install a package manager, say install this thing, and boom, there it is.
So when would it come a time, like, it's probably best to use Gmail versus like creating a server? You're just saying you're using this Gmail now because you don't have
As a demo
server.
purpose, right? Yeah.
Right.
So in more of a corporate environment,
Right.
most likely you're going to have Microsoft Exchange. It's like the big beast of everything. There's a specific server that hosts that, gets everybody their email, processes everything that's going in and out. So your settings would be different for that. You probably wouldn't have to go through all this trouble, and that's kind of what you're looking at with bigger startups, though. From my understanding, still, a lot of them use Gmail because it's cost effective. You don't have to have all these IT people coming in and building all these servers. You don't have to pay for this extra service outside of what you're already paying to operate your business. Gmail, everybody's familiar with it. It's fairly secure. It's a good alternative when you're just starting out. Resources are tight. So there might be instances that you do work for like a super small company or a startup that just can't afford all of those extra things. Most likely they're going to use Gmail.
I'm sorry, are we supposed to be putting that in?
Oh, yes, sorry.
Oh,
So
we are.
yeah, continue on from where you stopped at in the last screen on your script and add all this in there. So we do need these settings to actually keep this going. All right, now we're into our actual message settings. This is the part that you'll probably work with the most. What we're going to do is going to be setting the subject and then what's in the body. So the subject line is pretty important. We don't like getting emails without a subject line in it. So the way I set this was that it was a contact request. This is all just text that we're putting in here. And then we're looking for, which I didn't update this one page, but we're using a simplified validation thing here. It's called strip tags. Now, this PHP function will pull out certain characters, but not all of them. It's not as strict as the actual filter is, which is why we put it on the variable to begin with. So we're just kind of adding this extra one in here in case something breaks. Then we have our first name variable, a space, and then the last name variable. And with the way this is set up, we have to have a line break in there because we're including HTML in here. So we've got our styling, right? It's gonna style the actual thing that everybody receives in their inbox. Pretty basic stuff. Got a color, changing the font size, changing how the paragraphs looks a little bit. So you'll insert this in the next area after everything we just did in your script, and it will basically process everything that we just got out of that form. So our subject line, we looking at the body. This is just text that I put in there. Make it look nicer, help people kind of find their way through it. If you end up with a ton of fields, these headers will help break up certain content sections that people might need to look for in there. Then we'll put their name in there, and what I did here is in the name thing, I put the two variables next to each other. So their first name and their last name are gonna be in the same line. The email address will come next, and then any comments that they've got, which I gave its own heading too, kind of separate it out from the other two fields, make it a little bit easier to see. Like I said, if you get a ton of fields in here, it can get really busy after a while. The place I work at now, they were doing this through Perl when I first got there. I couldn't even find the correct documentation for how this was written, and they were receiving these horrible text emails where there were just lines of text, and you couldn't make out anything in them. They were so many pages long of just information that people were submitting on these massive forms, and there were things we needed to know, demographic information about stuff they were using, but nobody could read it. It took forever to read what it said and pick out what it said. So we kind of made some changes so that way, make it a little bit nicer, put the HTML in there, make it more legible, and save people time that way. So go ahead and add this part in your script that's coming up next. Have a variable in there with it. You have to use this dot notation so that it knows that you're putting a variable in there. And so you get a string, your variable, and then it doesn't auto-detect any spaces. So you have to put an actual space in there. So quote, space, quote. Otherwise, it's gonna run together.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's kind of a manual process on that.
Now, what is the strip tags again in this?
That was just an extra step of validation.
Okay.
It's not as intense as the other filtering thing that we did when we declared our variables, but it will pull out some tags that are in there. So that way if something manages to get through, something happens, you fat finger part of your thing, there's some
Kinda
extra
like a
step here.
second scrub of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's just another built-in PHP function. Because it's not as strong as the rest of the sanitation stuff that they got, but it can be useful whenever you need to kind of pull stuff back, but still need to let people put some sort of characters in their messages. And it really is kind of case by case, depending on what you want to let people do.
Question, you said this can go, any server, right? So any device, any server?
As long as you've got PHP installed on it. So say you've got your website and it's on whatever hosting service you're using. This is one of those things, if you've ever seen a CGI bin folder,
Okay.
that's where this script would go. And the point of putting it in there, you really can probably call it anything you want to, but that folder has different permissions. You need to be able to execute the thing that's in there, and so it's got that execution permission basically put on that folder.
So this also means that it could still, like, for instance, go across like Internet Explorer, any
Yes.
browser?
Any browser.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is something that's mostly happening on the back end.
Okay.
Yeah, as long as it hits to this script, it's on the back end of your website, basically, just kind of processing in the background.
Okay.
Okay, we're almost done. So, this last little bit we're going to put in there finishes up this whole process. We've got one more PHPMailer thing to put in here. Got to tell it that it's HTML, otherwise it won't render it in the recipient's mailbox as HTML. It'll just get a bunch of crap, and you don't want that. So, we set it to HTML. We tell it this is true. We did set one header in here. Like I said earlier, the headers can be used to set things like priority, the type of email that you're sending. There's a lot of documentation on that, and kind of really depends on what you need it to do. But what we're doing here is we're telling it we want to go to confirmation.html as soon as it sends. And that file is included in there. So once they hit send, it reloads and sends them there, sends your message separately. And then we've got our little function here that actually does the sending. If there's nothing there, hopefully it doesn't get to this point and nothing is actually there, it errors out. Otherwise, you get a nice little console message basically says your message is sent. You can check that if you want to, but you'll know for sure once you go check your inbox and see that it's actually there. So we're gonna add this part that will finish out our code, or I can just go and give you all a link with everything finished and it says we're at this point, which I believe was if you look at your URL and go to the @SteffiCamaro that's at the top there. I have two different REPLs in there. One of them just says PHP scripting. That one has the entire finished project in it. If you click run, it'll pull up your form. It'll show you your server. You can fill out that form and send an email to this Gmail box, which I've got open so we can see everybody's responses.
I don't need to do it because I didn't complete mine, right?
Well, you're in the one that is completed now, though.
Right,
So,
but I can't run it because,
so see, it's already got it over there. All of these files are already done. So right now you should be able to fill that out and hit submit. So if you go up to where it says, it has my username in there. Oh, see, it didn't allow us. So go back here. And click on the second arrow. It'll take you to my account. Scripting PHP, my So probably, yeah, I think it does an anonymous thing whenever you start editing somebody else's code. So because I think we did for control of the original name, it'll have my name. It'll show you everything I've got, which I have some. Close out. Oh, I did put a meme in here too because hold on. One more slide. So once you get further on with PHP, you can become this guy. Who? Oh man. Let's see. A little bit bigger. All right. So Laravel is a framework that you can actually use with PHP, kind of like React and Vue and all that fun stuff is. I've used it a little bit before. I liked it. Worked pretty well. So, you know, once you get some more coding in with some PHP, you can become this guy. Because Laravel is like the hot word to use. People look for that. They may not know what it is, but that's what the recruiters are looking for. So yeah, there's my meme. That's the last slide. And then you can go in. My mouse will come back. And actually check out this mailbox. So here's Christine's email that I got in Gmail here. Got her contact information and her comments. This is what it looks like once you receive it. So basically you can take this, you can adjust it as you need to, you can send it to yourself, set up your own box, and this is a very, very basic form. You can expand on it, kind of play around with it. Some of the resources that are in the slideshow, I'll post to the group and stuff. Lots of links in there, kind of walk you through the process some more, but really the understanding of how it works, that you've got an email server, that you've got a server running your PHP too. Once you've all got that down, you can use it in other processes. You can use Python to do this. That's another big hot word people are looking for right now is people don't know how to code in Python. So that's another way you can go about doing this. Anyone that's going to be using Node, NodeMailer has a similar process. It's kind of it's the PHPMailer thing. It's very similar. You've got some packages you install, you set up some settings, you pass in some variables, tell it what you want it to do. And it took me maybe half a day to learn how to use that because I was already familiar with this. Completely different language, completely different setup, but since I was already kind of familiar, it went really, really fast. So just kind of some things to keep in your mind in case you're curious how this process works or if you're ever in a position where you need to know this. Here you go. All right. Any questions? No? Good? Good? All right.
All right, so that's all we have for you guys tonight. Feel free to grab some more pizza. I think it's still out there, or drinks, and mingle for a little bit.